Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very special occasion. My name is André Plourde, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Public Affairs here at Carleton. I'm joined this afternoon by our President, Dr. Roseanne O'Reilly-Runta, by Mr. Tony Tattersfield, the Chair of the Board of Governors, and our distinguished speaker and honorary graduate, Mrs. Chanda Kochhar. I also welcome to the stage the Marshal of Convocation, Dr. Catherine Kelly, and Dr. Keir Armstrong will introduce the honorary graduate. Carleton University acknowledges and respects the Algonquin people, traditional custodian of the land on which Carleton University campus is situated. I am honored to introduce to you Elder Terry McKay, who will open our event today and provide greetings from the First Nations peoples.
Good day, and thank you for the honor of having me here. I'm a high school dropout, so this is the closest I'll be to higher education. But I'm honored to be here. I'm from the West Coast, but I've been around here for about 32 years, so the local tribe has accepted me, and on behalf of the local Algonquin Nation, I welcome you here. It's so special to be here and to honor someone too, and that just means to us that the land here is now being used for some good. That's the education, the furthering of our education. So I would like to open with prayer. We can all stand up, please. When I say my prayer, I say Creator, but that also includes God, Allah, Buddha, and whatever deity that you worship. When it's my time to leave, I believe that there's only one deity up there waiting for me. I don't want to be going up there and then looking for door 1 or door 2 or door 3, so Creator, we thank you for bringing us safely to another day. We thank you for bringing us together. We thank you for this educational institution that helps us and guides us to be better citizens of the world. Creator, today that we mark this special occasion, we ask for your blessings on the person who's receiving the honors. May we use it in a good way. Creator, we ask you to give us a good day today. All my relations. Thank you.
Please be seated. Thank you, Elder McKay, for those kind words and those special words about Carleton. Once again, welcome. I call upon Dr. Keir Armstrong to introduce our honorary degree recipient. Dr. Armstrong is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Economics.
Madam President and Vice Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Chandra Kochhar. Mrs. Kochhar was born in Jodhpur in northwestern India and raised about 290 kilometers east of there in Jaipur, where she attended and graduated from St. Angela Sophia School. She then moved to Mumbai, where she earned a BA at Jai Hind College. After graduating in 1982, she studied cost accountancy and later earned a master's degree from the Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies. In the process, she won the Rockhart Gold Medal for Excellence in Management Studies, as well as the J.N. Bose Gold Medal in Cost Accountancy. Ms. Kochhar began her career in 1984 with Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation of India, ICICI for short, Limited, which had been incorporated 29 years earlier at the initiative of the World Bank, the Government of India, and representatives of Indian industry, with the objective of creating a developmental financial institution for providing medium and long-term project financing to Indian businesses. Ms. Kochar was instrumental in establishing the ICICI Bank during the 1990s, and subsequently headed the infrastructure, finance, and corporate banking business of ICICI Limited. In 2000, she took on the challenge of building the bank's nascent retail business with a strong focus on technology, innovation, process reengineering, and expansion of distribution and scale. Ms. Kochar was appointed to the board of directors of the bank in 2001. During 2006-2007, she successfully led the bank's corporate and international banking businesses during a period of heightened activity and global expansion by Indian companies. From 2007 to 2009, she was the joint managing director and chief financial officer during the most recent critical period on the global financial landscape. She was appointed to her current position of managing director and chief executive officer of the bank in 2009 and became responsible for its diverse operations in India and overseas. She also chairs the boards of the bank's principal subsidiaries, which include India's leading private sector life and general insurance companies. In addition to her responsibilities at the ICICI Group, Ms. Kochar is a member of the Board of Trade, the High-Level Committee on Financing Infrastructure, the India-Japan Business Leaders Forum, the US-India CEO Forum, and the UK-India CEO Forum. She is also a deputy chairperson of the Indian Banks Association and on the boards of the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, the National Institute of Securities Markets, the Institute of International Finance, and the International Monetary Conference. In the past, she was a member of the Power Authority Group, Advisory Group, constituted by the Indian Ministry of Power, and co-chair of the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in 2011. Ms. Kochar is the recipient of numerous awards and distinctions for her services to the banking sector in general and her leadership of the ICICI Bank in particular. To name a few, she was awarded Asia Pacific Region Retail Banker of the Year 2004 by the Asian Banker, Businesswoman of the Year 2005 by the Economic Times, and Rising Star 2006 by the Retail Banker International. She's been listed consistently in Fortune's Most Powerful Women in Business since 2005, and among the top 50 in each of the last 4 years. She has also been listed consistently in Forbes's World's 100 Most Powerful Women since 2009, sits currently in the 43rd spot, and was ranked as the most powerful businesswoman in India in 2013. Perhaps most significantly, she was conferred with the Padma Bhushan, one of India's highest civilian honors, in 2011 for distinguished service of high order. And now I am greatly honored in presenting her to you here today for further recognition of her achievements. Madam Vice Chancellor, in recognition of her pioneering work in the financial sector, effective leadership in a time of economic crisis, And as a role model for engaged and concerned business practice, I request that you confer the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa upon Chandra Kochar.
Ms. Kochar, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Faculty Senate and the Board of Governors, I hereby confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereto pertaining. Congratulations. Thank you. May you wear this in good health and remembering this wonderful day. Thank you. Okay, I'll hold it for you.
Thank you. So I would like you please to welcome Mr. Barj Dahan. Mr. Dahan will say a few words introducing reasons for endowing this lecture in honor of his parents. Barj?
Vice Chancellor, President Vante, Dr. Chandra Kochar, distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues, good afternoon and welcome to the 2014 Dahan Lecture. About 15 years ago, while I was in India visiting at the center which my father established, a middle-aged Dalit woman, someone we now call Dalit, Mahatma Gandhi used to call them Harijans, children of God. She approached me one morning and said she wanted to talk with me. I said, that's fine. She was working at the center as a domestic helper. That was the word being used, but in the traditional language, her role was of being a sweeper and cleaner at the institution. She said to me that she was truly grateful for the work she has at the center and the additional benefits she is receiving, especially subsidized education for her children. Then she went on to say, she and the family does not have enough money to continue paying the fees so her daughter, Sudha, who was in grade 8, could continue her schooling. She also went on to tell me that her daughter dreams of joining the Indian Navy. Essentially, it was a plea for help. Some years later, Sudha successfully graduated from our 3-year nursing diploma program while achieving the top score in her final year in the statewide examinations. Though Sudha did not realize her dream of joining the Indian Navy, she did get an education with specific skills and competencies and has been employed as a nurse ever since. Over the years, when I go to that center, her mother still often comes up to me and says, your father, your family has changed my family's destiny due to the work and the schooling that opportunities were given to them through our work there. Sikh scripture says good education is about doing good to others. The Dahan lecture is intended partly to honor my parents. By the way, they're still alive. My dad is 90 and my mother is 88. My father, Budh Singh, and Kashmir Kaur, and in a small measure, to continue their work. The Dahan lecture is also intended to honor our speaker, the lecturer. My parents were born and raised in rural Punjab, India, during the height of the Indian independence movement. While my father was able to obtain a grade 8 education, my mother did not have an opportunity to go to school, partly because there was no school in her village. Most villages did not have schools in those days, and most parents did not send their girls to school. In our Western cultures, there's an old adage, which says that a lady's name should appear in the newspapers only 3 times in her life to announce her birth, her marriage, and her demise. This is according to Canadian writer Sandra Martin in her book, Great Canadian Lives, A Cultural History of Modern Canada Through the Art of the Obituary. In India, especially in rural areas, until recent times, a woman was rarely called by her name. She was simply referred to her as her father's daughter, her husband's wife, and then later her son's mother. It was this prevailing social norm and the attitudes towards women that my parents have tried to change through providing education targeted at girls from rural areas of Punjab. In 1981, Guru Nanak Mission Medical and Educational Trust was launched, an Indian-based charity started out of Canada. My father, my mother, our extended family and friends have worked hard over the years to establish this signature not-for-profit enterprise, providing education from kindergarten to grade 12, nursing programs, drug and alcohol addiction prevention programs, healthcare, and more specifically, nursing education. I asked my father one day, I said, why the focus on nursing education? He said, because it is a good profession, and it is a needed profession in that part of the country, and that it provides skills that will not only help to improve the health of the family of the nurse, but also in the community at large. This was a pioneering Canada-India collaboration to which thousands of Canadians have contributed immensely over the years. This enterprise has graduated approximately 1,900 nurses, and over 2 of them now work and live in Canada. In 1997, when we launched our degree program in partnership with the University of British Columbia, there were only 2 degree-granting nursing institutions in the entire state of Punjab. So 1 for every 10 million people. In relation to Canada, we had 1 institution for every million Canadians in the field of nursing. Nursing was not a profession in demand in Punjab, and equally so in most parts of India, for 2 reasons. Nursing was associated as a dirty job. So, if you were from higher caste families, that was not work for your daughters. And in Punjab, where Sikhs were in a majority, they also had the same attitude. We're not going to have our daughters go to nursing school and become a nurse and look after sick people. So we changed all of that. So today, as a result of what we did, my father did, my mother did, in the state of Punjab, there are nearly 80 nursing degree-granting institutions today. We fundamentally transformed the social status of the nursing profession in that state. When you go to Punjab, or if you go to Punjab, to this day, when you see matrimonial ads from Canadian families or American families or British families, and the ads specifically say that we are looking for a tall, light-skinned, young woman for our handsome son, and she should preferably be a nurse with a degree from Tahanklera. So that's the kind of impact we've had. The Canada-India Center of Excellence at Carleton was established to build creative bilateral coalitions in scientific research and application of technologies, and to engage Canada and India in informed dialogue on strategic public policy issues facing both our great countries. The Dehan Lecture, in its own way, as an integral part of the center, hopes to inform, to engage, to inspire us to continue doing important work to build better and more prosperous relationships between Canada and India. It is fitting, then, that our speaker today is an individual of global influence with a wealth of experience and knowledge, an outstanding executive leader in banking, helping to bring needed financial services through innovation and low-cost technologies, especially targeted at the rural poor of India, and taking the ICICI brand beyond its borders and into the global market. I am thrilled, Dr. Kochhar, to have you come and deliver the 2014 Dehan Lecture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dehan. And now please join me in welcoming our speaker and honorary graduate, Ms. Chandra Kochhar.
President Ronte, members of the faculty, students, members of the board of the Canada-India Center, and all other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to receive this recognition from the Carleton University, and it's really a great pleasure for me to be with all of you here today. Actually, as I see the list of the past recipients, I was looking at that yesterday, I really feel inspired to be counted amongst all of them. Because what it really brought out to me was, not just that there were a range of achievements from these individuals, but it also brought out that the university has a commitment to recognize and honor excellence across different fields and across various areas of human endeavor. And I really, therefore, accept this recognition with a lot of humility, because I definitely believe that the achievements that this recognition recognizes are not just my achievements. They actually represent that untiring effort and the hard work of thousands of both men and women that work in the organization that I've had the opportunity to lead. Many of them, or rather I should say some of them, are present here today as well. But on their behalf, on behalf of those thousands of men and women back home, and on behalf of myself, I'm very honored to accept this recognition. This honor by what we call, and I learned this, that Canada's capital university, to an Indian CEO, I think it's symbolic of the times that we are living in today. I think it's symbolic of the fact that the world is becoming flatter, that East and West are coming together. It's also symbolic of the fact that there are growing aspirations of strengthening the relations between India and Canada. Because again, I believe that we are just not exploited the potential at all of the kind of possibilities of relations that India and Canada can have. And I think it's also symbolic of the fact or of the contribution that a lot of Indo-Canadians that they have made to the Canadian economy. Those who have come here to seek opportunities in Canada and have contributed to the Canadian economy and growth and prosperity. So I think in a way it's symbolic of many things. And as I therefore stand here today, I was thinking of, what I should talk about. And I thought I should just talk about the kind of changes that we all experience in the current environment. Because I think today's environment is very volatile, changing all the time, dynamic all the time, and every time and every day, there is news of some innovation taking place somewhere, which is an innovation at one end, but it is a disruptive force for some other business, and it is therefore a requirement for some other business to reinvent their business model. So in this environment where everything is continuously changing, I think it's best to talk about what are those multiple forces of change that are impacting all of us, our lives, and our organizations. I think one of the most important driver that is impacting all of us today is really global rebalancing. Clearly, I think the share of the developing economies in the world GDP is continuously growing. It was not even as early as 2000s that the developing economies just had less than 20% share in the world's GDP. And today they have more than 40% share in the world's GDP. So it's not really a one-day event that suddenly one would say that the balance of power is shifting, but it's a process of strengthening of the developing economies. And I think this process has a lot of impact on the way we all look at our businesses, whether sitting in the developing economies or sitting in the developed economies, and how we all want to reorient our business models as the rebalancing takes place. The second important driver that is affecting all of us today is global interconnectedness. So while the balancing in a way is changing, but the world is becoming more and more dependent on each other. I would think that it's just very true today that the market capitalization of any Indian company could probably depend on the amount of sales that it achieves in UK out of a product that it could have manufactured in China. So the world is, in that sense, so much interdependent upon various geographies, various units, various businesses, and so on. And why go that far as well? We all know how the behavior of a home buyer in United States impacted, in a way, the entire global financial economy to a large extent. So, poet John Donne once had said that no man is an island entirely of itself, but I think that extends today to say no country is an island entirely of itself. So we have to recognize that the world is becoming interdependent on each other. The third driver that is impacting us, and in a way impacting us the most, is really the advances in technology. And these advances in technology are no longer limited to the fact that storage capacities are going up, computing capacities are going up, costs are coming down. It's not just that. I think it's also one more change that is being driven by technology, which is the entire societal change. It is the change about how we live our lives. I think if we look at how we live our lives today, that's very different from how we lived our lives 10 years ago. And it's going to be very different how we will live our lives 10 years later. Because it's not just advancement in technology, it's digitization, it's mobility, it's social media. And all this is impacting us as individuals, as the way we interact with our family, as the way we interact with our people in the organization, and as the way the customers interact with us. And therefore, for all of us, it's important to be live to the development that all these things are causing in the entire ecosystem, and how do we adjust our business models to it. And as we talk of these changes, the issue is not just that changes are taking place continuously, but the issue is the change of direction itself is never clear. I think one thing that I have learned as we have managed businesses in the past few years is you never know where the change will come from and what change will impact you. So being a bank, in a normal course, one would have thought that everything that the banks are doing globally, we need to learn from them, and we need to see what advances in technology they are all making. But the issue is today that there could be certain advances in technology by a handset manufacturer that can actually impact a bank's business. There could be advances by a communication service provider that could impact your business. There could be advances or changes done by a non-banking payment systems player that could impact your business. So, as we saw, Apple introduced something called Apple Pay. Now, I think it's something that changes the entire payment system by an entity that is not even a bank. And therefore, the issue is that when, in that context, and I'm taking that only as an example, in that context, when banks look at their own business models, they have to figure whether these advances are an opportunity for them or a threat for them, whether these players are their friends or are they their competitors, whether advances like this will actually take away the credit card customers of the banks, or whether they will add a lot more customers into technology-based payment systems, which banks can actually tap into as a potential. So I think it's constantly that we have to keep thinking about what the environment is doing and what impact that has on our own business models. So again, if I were to just relate this to how we have used or reacted to these changes in ICICI, we've actually believed that we always have to be at the forefront of keeping our organization ready for the changes that would take place. And in a way, we've always been in the forefront of using technology for offering better products and services to our customers. So it was just about, and the use of this technology has transformed us as an organization. So it was just about, less than 20 years ago, just before we began our retail business, so it was around 2000s or the beginning of that we were an entity which was more or less a single product entity. We had 4 offices all over India. We had 1,000 employees and we had 3,000 customers. And from there on, today, we have more than 4,000 branches. We are present in 18 countries across the world. We are a banker to the smallest farmer in Punjab, so to say, to the largest infrastructure project that takes place in India, or to the largest project that is set up maybe by an Indian company globally. And we have 35 million customers, of which half of them actually have a savings balance of less than $2 in their account because they're financial inclusion customers. So this kind of transformation would not have been possible had we not used technology both as a differentiator and as an enabler. And I won't go into in which ways we use technology because we've always looked at finding ways of using technology to offer something different to the customers. Also using technology to always redo our business models and make them more competitive. But had we not used technology, we would have never been able to achieve a transformation like this. So the point is that as changes take place, we have to keep reacting to those changes, but it's also important that we anticipate some of these changes and keep ourselves ready for it. So in my view, I think today's world is a VUCA world. VUCA is a term that many of you may have heard, a term that's used by American military, which stands for volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex. So a VUCA world where everything is changing all the time. And therefore, what does this do to leadership? And what does this do to all of us? I think at this time of the volatile, ambiguous, and complex world, it's leadership that becomes even more relevant and even more important. Again, Harry Truman once said that it is people who make history and not the other way around. Because in periods when there is no leadership, the world almost stands still. But progress occurs only when courageous leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. And in this VUCA world, leaders have to seize that opportunity to say, how can they use every change as an opportunity for themselves and for their organizations? So how does a leader deal with these changes? Again, in my view, the process is pretty simple. And if I look back, that's in a way somehow, how we have done it again in our organizations and how I have done it in the last few years. I think the process starts by laying down a strategic path. I think every one of us, whether in our individual lives or for our organizations, needs a goal, a direction where we all need to head. So you need a clear strategic path or a goal that you define for yourself. And that has to be a long-term objective. But it's also important that we do not get swayed by that long-term, by the various changes that occur in our broad direction that we have set for ourselves. But the second important step is that we have to focus on execution, because just having a long-term objective or a direction is not enough if we do not back it with detailed, hard work. And again, for execution, as far as the leader is concerned, it's never a leader alone that can execute. We have to build a team, we have to mentor the team, and we have to get the team, carry the team along to actually achieve results. But again, it's not just having a path and executing. It's as important to communicate. And again, we've seen that in this today's day and age, you have to first communicate with your employees to make them believe in your strategy and why that strategy is important. You have to communicate with your customers, you have to communicate with the regulator, you have to communicate with your investors, and you have to constantly communicate to tell them what path you're taking and periodically tell them where the organization is on that path, what's the progress made on that path. And in my view, what is equally important is that when we talk of communication, especially for a CEO, it's not just a one-way street. I think for CEO, it's even more important to be open to reverse communication so that the CEO is always aware of the ground realities. Listen to your customers, listen to your employees, listen to your regulators. When each one of them tell you something, there is some lesson there to see what are the ground realities in your organization. So I think we always have to keep communicating. The fourth important thing is building diversity. And again, if you look at ICICI, that's really been a marvelous example of building diversity in workforce. Clearly, diversity, when most of the organizations speak about it, they speak about it as a nice-to-have syndrome. But in my view, diversity is a necessity because it's only when you look at building diversity in your organization, you actually look at using the entire talent base that exists in the country. In India, again, we have seen that while, as you said, girls may not have an opportunity to pursue careers in the many smaller villages, but as we look at the girls, they are equally intelligent or sometimes even more intelligent when they come out, when you look at their examination results. Again, I'm told that even at this university, almost 50% of the students are girls. So as a Chinese proverb always said that women hold up half the sky. And if that is so, then why should any organization look at only the other half? I think it's important to look at the entire talent base and build a strong talent base in the organization. And not just that, I think it is that diversity that then ensures a better quality of decision making, not because any gender is superior than the other, but just because when you look at both the genders sitting together and looking at the decision, I think you've looked at it even more comprehensively than what you would have done otherwise. So I think, in that sense, that also becomes a very, very important part for an organization. And finally, I think for an organization, it is important to keep innovating. Keep innovating, keep redoing the business models because, the kind of changes that I spoke about are disruptive in nature. They are also constructive in nature. Sometimes they will come as an opportunity, sometimes they come as a threat. But even if it's an opportunity, you have to seize that opportunity and redo your business model. If it's a threat, you have to give up on an existing business model and create a new business model. So I think in today's day and age, you have to keep reinventing, relearning, and redoing your business models all the time. And what is most important is to also see or realize that any change that takes place in the environment can actually offer you opportunities that you never thought of. Again, I'll give you an example. At one point in time, a driverless car was actually expected to be a myth. But today, if you read, there is a Google car, Now, what happens when I first heard about that car, I thought a driverless car is the riskiest thing that can happen to the world because how do you put a car without a driver on the road? But actually, when I saw a film on it, what I realized is that there are so many risks of a driver-driven car that you do away with when you have a driverless car because that driver will not drink and drive. In that car, you don't have the risk of the driver texting while driving, which happens in India most of the time. You don't have the risk of driver falling asleep behind the wheel. So I think, any innovation that happens gives us various opportunities. Some of them give us an opportunity to grow our business. Some of them give us an opportunity to manage risks in a very different manner. And I think it's upon us, how do we look at each of those changes and seize those opportunities? So again, I'll relate this to, the way we have handled this in ICICI. Now, I spoke about the technological innovations, but just about executing strategy. If I just talk of the last 5 years again as an example, it was in the year 2009 that we took stock of our business, and we saw that we were delivering about 7.8% return on equity, and that we had built a lot of concentration risks both on our funding side and on our lending side. And at that time, we just set a broad direction and a quite a aspirational goal to say that we want to double the return on equity and take it to 15%. And when we did that, we then broke it up into deliverable objectives. We said that we will get there by first a period of consolidation and then a period of growth. And not just that, talking about communication, we actually then converted the communication into very simple language. We called it the 4 C's. And we said the 4 C's stand for CASA, credit, costs, and capital. Without making it too technical or too banking oriented, I would just say that CASA meant our focus on current and savings account deposit, which was to rebalance our funding portfolio. Credit meant our focus on improving credit quality, that is to rebalance our asset portfolio. Costs signified our focus on operating efficiency because we wanted to bring the cost income ratios down. And capital just referred to our focus on capital conservation because just after the global financial crisis, I think that was the most important asset or possession that a bank had. So by converting it into very simple language, we were able to actually convince our entire team, what it meant and what were we setting out to achieve. Not just that, then we kept communicating with the regulators, analysts, investors almost every quarter about where we are on changing our funding mix, on changing our loan mix, and on the steps that we took to reach the higher return on equity. And through this focus on execution, through this focus on step-by-step approach and making communication simple, we now, in less than 5 years, have actually doubled our return on equity and are today generating 15% return on equity. So I think what this does is that it makes me believe that in today's volatile world, leadership is all about the right balances all the time. A leader has to balance the long-term goals with the short-term imperatives. A leader has to balance opportunities that come in the system along with the risks that always arise with, with new changes that take place. A leader has to balance vision with execution because, again, it's, sometimes very easy to get swayed by vision and not focus on ground realities, or sometimes get so bogged down to the nitty-gritties that you lose the big direction. So it's always important for us to find that right balance and balance both the ends, whether opportunities, risks, vision, execution, and so on. But what does this mean, to all of us, again, in our lives, or even to the students, of this university and to each one of us individually? I think it just means that, world will keep changing. But as the world keeps changing, we have to have a focus on a broad direction and at the same time adjust our moves in line with the way things are moving by backing it with execution. And I just saw Mahatma Gandhi's statue outside, and in a way I can relate to what I'm saying to one thing that Mahatma Gandhi had once said. He had said that, and it's not exactly in his words, but the gist is that he had said that for a sound human being, or even he related it to a nation, for any nation to be sound, you have to be like a banyan tree, where your roots are very, very strongly inserted into the, into the ground. But your branches are so flexible that they sway when the winds come. Because if they are not flexible, they will break when the winds come rather than swaying. And if your roots are not strong, the whole tree will get uprooted. So I think in today's VUCA world, as I said, it's important for all of us to actually look at life in that way, that some of our basic direction, our basic values, our basic goals have to be as strong as the roots of the banyan tree. But the rest of our approach to life has to be very flexible, because we will have to keep endeavoring it alongside as changes will keep taking place in the environment. So for all of us, whether it's as individuals or whether it's as leaders of any organization, I think it's a constant journey of moving along with the environment in this changing world and adjusting and readjusting ourselves. And in a way, I think finally, therefore, it is about what the motto of this university is, that ours the task eternal. Because in this changing world, there is never an end to keep learning or to keep doing. And when I had seen this, when I got the letter from the university, I actually related it to something what Nelson Mandela once said. When he fought for the freedom of his people, and finally one would have believed that at a certain point he would have said he'd done a lot, and he could have sat back and said that I have actually achieved what I set out to achieve. But I believe that when he said after gaining freedom, one of the first speeches that he made, he said, and I'll quote him, he said, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way. But I have discovered one big secret, and that is that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, but I can only rest for a moment, for I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended." So I think for all of us, our walk in this journey of life, especially in this today's changing and dynamic world, will never end. What we have to keep believing is that we are aware of the changes that are taking place in the world, and we keep reinventing and relearning and reinventing ourselves and our business models. And that's probably the best way to succeed in this life. Thank you.